Alrighty, thanks everyone for joining us today. I know that some things went through in legislation today that have now been kind of bubbling up that weren't kind of caught right away as being on the consent calendar. And so we have John Hill, who is the General Secretary for the General Board of Church and Society, and then the agency's President Bishop Sally Dyck. And they're going to be here just to kind of explain to you this is what happened today, and then also take any questions that you might have. Just know that there is still legislation to come that isn't factored into all of these items, but just wanted you to have some explainers in the meantime so you understood where things were. Also, once they're done kind of discussing, when you have questions, if you'll come up to the mics, that way everyone can hear your question and they can hear you well as well. Thanks.
Well, thank you for coming, and we appreciate so much the interest in the revised social principles. It's a very exciting part of this general conference, in my estimation. And we thank all the people who really have been a part of this. While it kind of feels like these chunks of the social principles have sort of like just, kind of gone under the radar on the consent calendar, I think part of that is because we've been working on this for 10 years. And people all over the church and the world have been working on it. And therefore, as we have these pieces of the revised social principles come through on the consent calendar, it's just really gratifying that people were wanting to honor the work, get the social principles approved. And I think we'll really, I personally think that having solid social principles again will help define a new expression of the United Methodist Church. I know we have social principles, but I sort of perceived that people had kind of not really taught them because we kept expecting that we'd have the revised ones coming up. And so that's the exciting part for me. It will help truly define who we are.
Thank you, Bishop. And I would echo, I feel, what we saw in the committee consideration, and then as the full General Conference was considering it, a deep respect for the years of work and the voices and the experiences of thousands of United Methodists who contributed to this document. And what I've sort of heard in the hallways and felt in the deliberations in committee is wanting to make sure that we respect that and the integrity of this whole document. As Church and Society, we submitted this as 6 different petitions. And so as of today, we have 5 of those petitions that have been adopted. The General Conference prior to today had adopted the political community section, which in the revision encompasses parts of the political community, the world community, as well as a part of the current social community, the 2016 Book of Discipline. Then the body adopted the preface, which is sort of the historical overview of the social principles and where they sit within our body of polity. And then today, the more sort of substantive pieces that were addressed were the preamble, which lays sort of this overall framework with some beautiful language that was crafted about how we are to be a church, even in the midst of disagreement on particular issues, as well as the community of all creation, which encompasses most of what was in the natural world of the 2016 discipline, as well as the economic community. So we have 5 of the petitions passed, all on the consent calendar with great support, and look forward to consideration of the final petition, which is on the social community, which has been calendared in today's DCA, finally. There was a little bit of a sort of a technical paperwork glitch on that, and so grateful that that is now finally calendared and will be up for consideration as soon as tomorrow.
Kristen Caldwell from the Oregon-Idaho Conference. I just wanted to ask if you could just give us a little bit more about what's in the social community part that we're expecting tomorrow.
Sure. So the current, and maybe I should have started at the beginning in the sense that the current Book of Discipline has the social principles in 6 different sections. The revision compresses those into 4. So the social community in the revision is mostly the entirety of the nurturing community, which deals with our most kind of close ring of relationships around the family, around marriage, issues of sexuality, as well as those social issues that impact our families and communities, from substance abuse and gambling to reproductive health, sexual harassment, issues around sort of beginning and end of life, including death with dignity and faithful care for dying people. So that is the work that is still before this body. A portion of what is in the current social community was actually adopted in the political community earlier. In the revision, some of that language around healthcare, around the rights of women and girls, the rights of men and boys, the language around indigenous, native, and native communities, that has been moved from what was in the current social principles into the political community. So really what is still for conversation are the nurturing community conversation as well as the social issues.
Heather.
In addition to the social principles that were adopted this morning on the consent calendar, we of course have had full communion with the Episcopal Church. One of the things the Episcopal Church is waiting for is to see the direction the UMC is going. Do you mind if I say, because I'm wondering if there's an interplay between what the social principles say and that relationship. Is there any kind of connection between those two things?
Yeah, you can get different answers on that. One has to do with just sort of some theological differences that a few people in the Episcopal Church still aren't sure about United Methodists. But by and large, what they really wanted to do is to find out who we are before they approved their full communion with the United Methodist Church. They wanted to know about our openness to all people. They wanted to know what was going to happen to the United Methodist Church before they made that commitment. So what happened is while we went ahead and approved that and were so excited about it, they chose to wait. They're meeting in their convention in July, and they chose to wait since they didn't know who we would be in time for all of the submission of their materials. And they will, they say they're going to say warm and affirming things about us in our process, but they're going to wait until their next convention, which is in 2027. And then they will make the final approval. Yeah, I think there's connection.
Do you mind adding why I asked that of you, your current role?
Right, as you may or may not know, I'm the ecumenical officer for the Council of Bishops of the United Methodist Church. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. And then you, then you. Sorry, I just get used to calling you.
Hello, I'm Peter Smith with the Associated Press. I wondered if I could ask about the one part of the social principles, the section that hasn't yet come to a vote, but the significance of it. As I understand it, the new version does not include the previous version's language regarding that homosexuality is not part of
Incompatible with Christian teaching.
Thank you. And also that, sexual relations are only affirmed within the covenant of a heterosexual marriage. I wondered if you could comment on the, removal of that language and how what the approach is now on those issues in the revised social principles.
John?
So I think one of our hopes, and I when I say our, I mean the sort of collective effort that this has been over the last 12 years from both the Board of Church and Society, the writing teams, the editorial teams. Our direction from the General Conference was to find language that is theologically grounded, that it is more succinct and precise, and that it speaks to the realities of our worldwide connection. And so on all of the matters that we have before us, our hope was to find language that would resource and equip ministry in as many settings as possible. And so around the issues of homosexuality and marriage, we have a church whose local contexts are dramatically different. And so our hope was that by having statements that could speak theologically to these matters, but not to any specific context, could then be applied across the context where the church is present. There has already been from the Standing Committee a particular petition that clarifies the ability of conferences to regions to set within their boundaries particularities around marriage rituals. And so I think that's evidence that this is language that can bridge across the variety of locations where United Methodists are present, and then in each context, folks can apply that more specifically.
Are you referring to the part about regionalization that allows for local adaptation of liturgical rites?
Sure. So that was part of the Standing Committee's work, was a specific one around marriage rights as well. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Yes.
Hi, Yonat Shimron from Religion News Service. Can you speak to some of the items that were approved on the consent agenda today that do not relate to the social principles, such as the drop? I guess there are some bans that were dropped, the ban on funding, LGBTQ affinity groups, advocacy groups. There was language from the traditional plan of 2019 that was dropped. Can you speak to that too?
That's not for, I mean, so to be clear,
So it's
our
not
board
GBCS.
didn't take action on that, so I don't want to speak on behalf of those who were working on that.
So you identified that there were several places in our book of discipline that had prohibitive language using apportionment funds. There also was, in terms of ordination, and so yeah, that's not the social principles, but certainly those they impact each other, and some of those went through as well, which just reinforces what we were trying to do with the social principles. And indicates, if I can say, a little bit of a new day in General Conference life.
I was just going to ask you kind of one more question about that. 5 out of the 6 are here. How you feeling going into this last piece that needs to get approved?
Well, we will be greatly relieved if, in fact, and when it happens, that all of these are passed, and that we have these new social principles to offer to the church. But, you know, I know John feels this way, as do I. We're not there yet. So we're cautiously optimistic. Would you say? Or are you going to go?
Sure, I'll go there. I'm cautiously optimistic. I carry anxiety maybe longer than you do, Bishop Dyck.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll lose some of that anxiety tomorrow or the next day. I think it is, we've seen the conversation out in the church. We've seen the conversation in all the familiarizations we've done and the orientations we've done. We've seen the conversation in the committees. We have not yet seen the full conversation on the plenary. And as we've seen at General Conference, plenaries can get focused on things we didn't know that they were going to focus on. And so I think we're, again, sort of waiting to see how the body, when they take up the full social community, what conversations they might have.
And I might just add, you know, as a resident bishop, I've seen that there's a spectrum on some of these things, you know, that you just don't know where it will all come down in terms of what people are comfortable with. But we're hoping for the best.
Hi, Cynthia Astle, United Methodist Insight. Could you speak to the difference between the social principles and those petitions that were adopted this morning on the consent calendar, because the ones that have been adopted have referred to specific paragraphs in the Book of Discipline that are church law, whereas historically, the social principles have been a set of guidelines, but this one part of them has been used as law. So could you speak to what the social principles are meant to be in the life of the church?
Can I, I'll start and you can continue. Well, kind of what I was trying to refer to before was it's the undergirding, and it supports or affects what some of the other disciplinary language is. You're absolutely right. Probably just like the Bible, there's some things that have been picked out and picked over, but you know, we trust that we'll be able to bring forward social principles on all kinds of things, including human sexuality, that will cause the church to be much more generous and gracious towards all people within the church and outside of the church.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Cynthia, as what is in the current Book of Discipline and also in the preface that this General Conference has already adopted, there's a very clear statement about how the social principles are not church law.
Right.
And I think it speaks exactly to what, how they are used in our church life as the best effort to speak to contemporary issues, and that they are meant to be a call to faithfulness and social engagement. So really equipping United Methodists to live out their faith around these issues.
And again, for conversation, discussion, learning, education, so that local churches and beyond can begin to rethink some of these things, especially since the last go-round on social principles, a whole lot of the world has changed, even in the last 10 years on some of these, like creation care, for instance. A whole lot has changed.
Thank you both.
Hi, Sybil Davidson from North Georgia. When did the new social principles go into effect?
Not soon enough.
So
Oh, there's an official answer to that.
there is an official answer. I don't have my discipline in front of me, but unless specified in the petition, I mean, this goes for everything at General Conference, unless specified, they would come into effect January 1. So these will be the official documents starting January 1.
But, you know, hopefully people go forth and start to read and teach and discuss. You don't have to wait till then. I don't even know what it means. They go into effect in some respects. They're there to help us live out the most faithful lives that we can following Jesus, especially from the United Methodist perspective. Victoria, do you have a question?
Does that mean that all motions go into effect, regardless of whether they're social principles or not, or January 1st?
Unless in the resolution itself it says effective at the close of General Conference or effective at some future date, a particular date. So the presumption is everything is January 1, 2025.
But there's a few things I've heard of that will be in effect immediately after General Conference. Thank you, Jesus.
But that would say it in the petition. When you're reading the petition, it will say that the effective date.
Victoria Rebeck, Northern Illinois Conference. So not to beat this into the ground, but to follow up with Cynthia's question. Maybe my memory fails me, that often happens, but it seems to me in the past 20 years, the social principles were moved into a different place, into the Book of Discipline, because the argument was that, oh no, this is church law. Because I had always understood it as not recommendation, but so maybe I'm dreaming.
Do you remember it
Could
being
be. I
in
will
a-
say that when I started 22 years ago, paragraph 160 was the natural world. So that was it has been at least 22 years. I don't know.
It seems to me they were 2 digits in that one. Well, maybe I was dreaming.
They might
pers-
have added a 0 as the book built. We can look into that.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
just curious.
Yeah. But I think, with the whole polarization around human sexuality, it became sharper and sharper about what was church law, what wasn't, and then kind of confusing the boundaries. I remember in Denver in '96, there was actions taken. We're going like, well, is that church law now? And, just around a variety of things. And again, it's the polarization, I think, that sharpened that, if that makes sense.
Hey, so I'm Rashinda, and I'm here representing Caretakers of God's Creation.
Yay.
And so, yeah, this is a much more robust entry, even though you'd think we'd have had enough before, into creation care and having that be an understandable, named biblical and theological focus of the church. Do you have any hope about how that might be lived out by the church? How we can actually reorient it, the missional priority of the church. What is that? And is creation care sort of refocusing itself as, in these times, our new missional priority?
I hope so. Because, again, it's one of those areas that I just happened, and this is not shameless promotion or anything, but I wrote a book on Jesus and the environment about 12 years ago. And, it was the big yawn, not because it wasn't a good book, but people did not want to talk about creation care. In my estimation, there's too many dollars in fossil fuel. And so that was just too controversial. And what was it? Renewing God's Creation that came out of the bishops. It just felt flat. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to do anything about it. Well, now just about everybody I know, and it's not just because I live in California, has been affected by some form of natural disaster. And I think we understand this isn't about, something that's going to happen to the next generation. This is happening to us. And at some point, I think as churches, we begin to do things differently. And I'm excited about that. It also has some interesting points about food, how we get our food, and toxic substances and stuff like that. So I hope, again, that, local churches in particular begin to have some conversations about, okay, what's our next step? What can we do now? People can't always jump from 1 to 10. But, even in making choices in our individual lives, sorry, you just hit my button.
Mine too.
You need to take the next step. And when you make this change in your life, well, you consider your next car, you consider your next house. And churches can do the same thing to be able to look at how they can be stewards and care for God's creation. So I'm excited.
Are you?
I am, sort of,
I would just add one piece
Sure.
to that, and that is, I think, to underscore that this document, and I appreciate the social principles, the current social principles, in the sense they're kind of a patchwork quilt of sentences over the last 40 years.
Yeah.
They don't always read as compelling as the folks who are wordsmithing it might think. And so this is meant to be a preachable and teachable document, right? And it's ordered in a way that has a clear preface, especially in community of creation, and then naming the challenges, creation in peril, and then how we have this call towards stewardship. And so I think just as a teaching document, this will be helpful and much more accessible to folks rather than cutting out specific sentences and trying to stitch them together. So, yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't been tweaked up yet, or people like myself over the years who make some amendment that, just doesn't fit quite right. It reads well.
Thank you.
All right. Who knew you had this many questions?
Oh, one more.
Up. No, come on.
Hey, Jasmine Haynes, Mississippi Conference. I just want to make sure I communicate this back accurately to my conference. You said that 5 out of 6 petitions on this with social principles has passed already, and they have all been pertaining to the preamble, the community, the creation community, and the economic community.
As well as the preface and the political community. So there were 3 today, and there were 2 in previous days.
And political community? Okay. And then the last one is pertaining to social community.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right,
Thank
Brent.
you very much for spending some time, and we will see them later in the week for an update.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for coming.